Hi folks, I'm International Master John Watson and this is Ask the Master on ICC TV. The main idea of this show is to provide you, the listeners and viewers, with a chance to ask questions from a master about chess and the chess world. Any kind of questions are acceptable. We talk a lot about openings, we can talk about books, we can talk about strategy, we can talk about current events in the chess world, great players, how to improve, time pressure, or anything else. You can try and stump me with a funny question. I think that's always interesting. I think I've got enough sense of humor to be embarrassed by some elementary thing that I should know that I won't, or some historical thing. I'm not really a big expert on chess history, although I think it's incredibly much fun. Chess strategy is a big subject. And this week, for example, what do we have? Sending games to show. A couple. Oh, you can send your games in. So how do you send your questions in and your games in advance? And the best, which is the best way to do it, you can send to an email, askiamwatson@chessclub.com. Chessclub.com is the ICC server or email, and so that's the best way to ask. So ASKIMWATSON at CHESSCLUB.com. And I get all those questions by email, and if I get them in plenty of time, I can prepare a good answer. You can also prepare a good question with a lot of details, and you can send me your games that way, which is probably not realistic any other way. You can also send a question to my ICC handle, John L. Watson, that's one word, JOHNL as in lion, WATSON. You can also get onto the chat, which is people love to do, and that's really a lot of the fun of this show is people on the chat. As usual, Alan's on there, and oh my, these we have almost a show's worth of comments here. Not many questions. You guys are just having fun talking with each other, it looks like. Alan got whopped in a 45-45 game with a promising U.S. junior. Well, since he gets on early, he gets rewarded. We'll take a quick look. D4, D6, Alan's favorite defense. Bishop C4, Bishop D7. Of course, that's a typo. I wonder if that's Knight D7. D4, B5, double question mark. Bishop B3, double question mark. Bishop F7 check. Oh, that's a cute trick. So this is a good thing to show everybody. This is kind of a classic idea that after queen check, the king has nowhere to go. G6 is the natural answer, but the king has nowhere to go. If it starts coming up, there's going to be some kind of checkmate, probably bishop G5 first or queen G5. Well, queen G5 and then D5 will be checkmate. And if the king goes to a light square, a couple of bad things can happen. One is just mate. I guess that's the easiest. So that's the natural move, but then there's a little fork, and you'll see that happening reasonably often. Just always look for loose pieces, and that rook is a loose piece. So he's right. Bishop F7 check would win massive material. All right, and it's a 45 minute game, so really they should have seen this. White should have seen that. I don't know what Alan's doing. Alan's just kind of goofing around here. This is completely insane. C5, not getting any pieces out. White takes, black takes. Now check wins again, obviously, but he plays queen D5 instead. Double exclamation point. Threatening checkmate in the rook. It can't be that crazy. This would also be good, right? Check. And then king takes and queen D5 would be nice. Just pick up that rook in the corner. That queen won't get trapped, I can almost guarantee you. Although you always have to check and make sure that the queen isn't trapped after you take it on A8. But White didn't play that way. White played queen D5. Why is this double exclamation point? I guess C4 is going to be played, right? Bishop G4. Ah, clever. Okay. So that's kind of cool. Having played absolutely crazy moves, you must have been drunk or something, or else Alan's reverted to being the most elementary, making the most elementary mistakes possible in chess after all this time. That would be disappointing. He does make a clever move here because now, if the queen, for example, takes the rook, we have this mate. So black's trying to counterattack. Of course, it's way too late. Queen F7 check, I assume. Double exclamation point. All right, and now bishop D5, double exclamation point. King C8, double question mark. I guess the only move would be here if you want to save your material, but that looks like it should lose by force to queen check. And my fault. That drops a queen. Okay, how does that lose by force? Well, there's no instantaneous win that I see. I mean, you could just attack this, and then there's nowhere for it to go because you've got to cover queen check. Knight h6 doesn't seem to work. Well, that's one way to win. Well, knight e5, I guess you can keep playing. Do we believe any of this? Anyway, white's winning. I mean, it's just way too much attack and too many pieces attacked. But instead of that, he plays king c8. Alan, what are you doing here? You're not protecting your pieces. You're not developing. You're dropping material like crazy. White plays knight f3. It's kind of cute. The idea there would be that if bishop takes, well, I don't know. I don't know what the idea is. He probably should just take that. Then you can either take that way or whatever. But in any case, you're losing that rook in the corner, or at least a knight after knight c6. But black didn't take. This is actually kind of a joke game, isn't it? Knight h6. This couldn't be a 45 game. Bishop takes h6. G takes h. Knight c3. Could just take the rook, I suppose. e6. Wow, there's a great move because it allows mate. Ta-da! Although the nicer mate, it's always nice to mate with the lesser piece, right? That's always kind of cuter. Now, Alan, you should be ashamed of yourself here. Well, I'm always showing games I got whopped in. That's healthy to show games you lose, but I don't know what you're doing here. You forgot about development. You forgot about the center. You forgot about everything. By the way, last time we had a delay of about 90 seconds, which is why you guys were making comments that I thought made no sense because I'd already talked about everything. There's almost always a 30-second delay. I don't know if you know about that. In other words, I see things when I'm talking. I'm 30 seconds ahead of you guys. You don't see what I say until 30 seconds later, roughly. But last week was 90 seconds, so we had some very odd communication things going on, where someone would suggest something that I'd already talked about a minute before. And that's fine. That's great. But I just wanted to explain that, how that comes out strange. The worst part here is he's going to read it all. Okay. Crazy. Alan, what's happened to you? You're reverting. You're going backwards. You're regressing. That's the word. Just remember, get your pieces out, and also maybe watch your pieces so you don't checks, captures, forcing moves. Remember, always look before you make your move. Look at the checks. Look at the captures. So oh, I missed one thing, I guess, here. Something about it wasn't, bishop takes d5 wasn't good because of mate. Oh, that was with knight f3 happening. Okay, so that was in this move. So that makes sense. Knight f3 makes sense. Or f3 would win the rook too. Good point. Okay, so in other words, you can't take this now. That's the only trap. All right, well, so see, I miss these things too. But let's see. What else do I want to talk about right off? I wanted to mention that I'll be out of town next week, so you'll have a chance to do something else. There won't be a show next week, so you can go to Disneyland or go to Tuesday Night Bingo or whatever what other brilliant things that are actually more important than this show. I can't imagine what, but I also had another little addition. We were talking about French defense books a little back, and we mentioned all those French defense books, and Paul Gottlieb wrote and added that I'd forgotten about Simon Williams' book, Attacking Chess, the French, which is a few years ago, but very, very, very much in line with the kind of thing I was saying, sophisticated players writing fun books about the French. And he has a lot of fun ideas, and Paul thought it was instructive because of the themes that Simon talked about, and I won't argue with that. It's not my absolute favorite book, but I should also mention he had an earlier very creative DVD called The Killer French, which doesn't overlap completely with Attacking Chess. They're both repertoire books, so they're obviously useful to get. It's hard to know what French books to buy, except for mine, of course, because there's so many really good ones around, and it's such a fascinating opening. Okay, so no more chat offhand that I see, probably because of the delay again, I imagine. At least I hope that's why. So let me just go over some questions I got. Here's from Gerardo Fernandez. He says, I see you often mention correspondence games, and I've always wondered where you get the games from. I mean, for OTB chess, that's over the board chess, theweekinchess.com is an excellent source, but what about mail games? Okay, so there are a lot of sources for correspondence games, and I guess the most used one now is sort of that whole market. There used to be maybe 15 different sources that people used and tried to combine. I had a database that just combined all kinds of different sources. Nowadays, you get most of your important correspondence games in ChessBase's correspondence database. That's what it's called. It's called Correspondence Database, and then it gives the year afterwards. For example, Correspondence Database 2017. It was called Core Database, so you might see an earlier version called CORR Database 2015 or something like that. And there are a lot of other databases, many of which can be found for free on the internet. You don't have to pay for them. Unfortunately, chess bases theoretically you have to pay for unless you want to borrow one from somebody. There are games from the IECG, the International Email Chess Organization, which is very good. They have their databases of their games, which are very good. The most important correspondence chess organization is probably the International. Oh, I'm sorry. IECG is actually the Email Chess Organization. The ICCF is the International Correspondence Chess Federation, and there are various ICCF databases hanging around, and as I say, I think they're just free, and they're very good. Now, ChessBase may include some of those games, but I don't think it includes all of those games. So a really good correspondence database might be combining a couple of these together with the correspondence database, the ChessBase correspondence database, as the basis. Another prominent source for years is Fernschach. Fernschach magazine Fernschach is German for correspondence chess or distance chess. And that magazine has been a great magazine for years, and there are databases of the games, and those are excellent. For a long time, the go-to source was Tim Harding's wonderful Ultra Core database, but he hasn't had one for many years, and I think most of them are probably absorbed in the ChessBase database. So it'd be nice if he did that again, but of course that's asking a lot. It's an incredibly time-consuming task. But Tim Harding was one of the leading correspondence players and organizers and writers. He wrote 2 books on correspondence chess at least. I don't want to get that wrong. I know of at least 2 that were both really fantastic books on correspondence chess. One of my favorite correspondence chess books is Sanakayev's. Well, it's got different names depending whether it's in English or German or whatever. One of them's called like The Way to the World Championship. He won the International Correspondence Championship. There are different titles for it, but it's Gregor Sanakayev. It's been many, many years since I've looked at this book, but it's just wonderful, wonderful games and a lot of, talking about correspondence chess. And another great one is Tim Harding's 50 or 60, I think it's 60 great correspondence games. You might want to look that up. You can just Google these things and you'll find the right titles. So a good question. Now I got a request to show that game Winslow Hovik Monvelyan that Elliot actually mentioned last week as something that Jeremy Silman had gone over in his column, and we got involved. There were a few comments made about that, and I thought, what the heck, why not? This is a game by someone who listens to the show, and is a viewer, and we might as well show viewers games, and this is really fun. I think it's really instructive. If you want to get more detailed notes, Jeremy Silman has a bunch on chess.com. So let me just talk about that for a second, talk about this game for a second, and show you. It actually has to do with this classic bishop sacrifice theme. So it's a French defense, and the reason Elliot mentioned it is because I was talking about how this move has really been taking over among very strong players anyway, as opposed to this, which White's getting really nowhere in this position. Really, it's just kind of difficult. Positionally, it's very nice for Black, even though he's far behind in development. So he's got a big negative in development, but the positional advantages are so nice that at a high level, White's been avoiding this a lot by playing this move. And so here's how that game went. Now, of course, here you have plenty of other moves. As we talked about, you have knight c6. You have knight f6, you have e takes d, and c takes d. You can do all kinds of things here. But in this case, Black simply takes the pawn, and White takes back, and Black plays here. And now for quite a while, White was playing this move. It's not a bad move, attacking here, and Black was defending, and then White has some options here. The main move is just here, and then Black was taking here. For a while, it looked like this is a pretty good line for Black based on the fact that in this position, if White plays here, Black can actually sneak out with the king. Just showing you a little background on this. I'm not going to go into this. Is crazy to go into this much detail. But it just turns out this is actually a small advantage for White, and it's kind of irritating. And Black's probably never going to win this game against a decent player. So Black sort of changed here and started doing other things. I think this move, Queen a5, is very interesting, just pinning this. And actually, I think it's completely equal too. But both sides can have some fun here. It's an interesting position. I don't know if Elliot's on here yet, but anyway, I just thought I'd show you that. What happens instead here is White doesn't play bishop b5. White plays, and there's many other things that can happen after bishop b5, by the way. Um, White played knight takes immediately and bishop d3. And one reason White plays bishop b5, by the way, I should mention sometimes, is because in this position, this is kind of subtlety that people do in modern chess. Okay, that's the same position and Black has an extra move in, but that extra move might be bad. Why might that be bad? Because if Black plays knight f6, his usual answer to e5 is knight d7, standard French move attacking in the center, and he doesn't have it because he's got an extra free move, bishop d7, which actually is getting in the way. So that's why bishop b5 is often played instead of bishop d3. So, but Elliot's answer is just as good or better. It's another standard way to play this. And Black develops, and White plays here because he wants to possibly avoid this ending that would happen after castles, where Black can take multiple times and then play queen takes d1 check. I don't know how that stands, but castling is certainly very, very common. White's usually not afraid of that ending. But there's some other ideas about putting the queen here. It means that the kingside attack can come faster sometimes. By the way, this was the first game I saw played here was Winnower Blackburn, very famous players, by the way, in 1901. It's the first game in the database. So it's funny how chess reverts sometimes. This move I'm not impressed with. Bishop e7 is almost always played, but if you are going to move the queen, I think queen c7 is a better move. Because then, if castles, you have this chance to play bishop here and stop e5 and have more active play as Black. And then if knight f3, one thing you can do here is just take this and you win the bishop pair. And then you play for e5 and f5 maybe after castling. So I like queen c7 if you're going to play anything here. And bishop e7 is also logical. White's had some nice games against bishop e7, but it's still very solid. Queen b6 is kind of, it's away from the king, and I'm not sure what it's doing. It's not covering this square. It's playable. But it's weird. And now Black makes another kind of slow move. He wants to get rid of the attacking piece here, but he's not developing. White plays b3. Black does go ahead with his plan to take. White plays bishop b2. Now I think maybe c4. I think you should hold on to that. Then you're going to have maybe an e5. The bishop's going to be active later. I like White in this position, but it's not bad what he did, but I'm not real sure if White has much of an advantage here. Now c takes d means that Black no longer has two center pawns to one, which he did here. You see that? Yes, that was one of Black's advantages. Black's disadvantage is he's way behind in development. White's already castled. White's cleared the back rank. Black's advantage is good, strong central pawns. But now that he takes this, whoops, sorry. Well, my mistake. He didn't take it. I guess that's what he should do. Okay, he's allowing Black to do that, and this I think is probably okay for Black because he's kind of caught up on development here, and then just I don't know develop or something. This is probably pretty equal. If White ever tries to advance here, then he's blocking off his own bishop, and maybe that's not so desirable. So I guess White would work on the c file. It's not much, if anything. So, queen b6 is working out okay, but I think White should have played c4. Anyway, Black plays this move instead, and that's very risky. Now a great move, excellent move by Elliot, blocking off that bishop and saving his attacking pieces. And Black tries to block off this bishop. Castling, of course, is extremely risky, probably losing because of some sort of e5 idea or maybe even taking. The king is very exposed. Notice that Black's put all these pieces over on the queen side. That's a really bad sign, away from the king. There's nothing defending the king. So Black blocks off the bishop. That seems logical. And White plays there. Good, solid positional move. Just going to come in on that side of the board. And Black now castles, which seems to lose by force. And this is the reason to show this game, which is that there's a standard... Okay, here we go. Yeah, let's just talk about this for a second. Queen d5 was a great move because c4 was not a real winning threat. Oh, we're going back to Alan's game. Sorry, Alan. We're past that now. We've gone past that. Tomek says, knight f3 is probably the best against weaker players sub 2000. A lot of players don't know what to do, but if you play e4 or d4, they all have their pet lines. Okay. Yeah, knight f3 is just more flexible, so you're more likely, if you're the better player, you're more likely to have more chances. Uh, it's real strange, people, on how people here can't see how great queen d5 is. Well, Alan, I think we got to move on to the next subject because we're kind of past that. We already spent some time on that game, but everybody's got it in the chats if they want to go over play it over again. Now, what are we talking about here? Okay, so now white has just a standard winning attack, and everybody should be aware of this. I mean, it's just something maybe not everybody knows. There's some pretty beginning players in this, and just developing players who don't realize, especially when you play the French, you always have to watch out for the idea bishop here. And the way white does that is it plays here first, hitting the queen. Doesn't really matter where the queen goes. Uh, I don't think it makes any difference. Black plays here. The exact same thing happens if black plays queen b6. White plays here, and black should be always watching out for this. Any French player should know enough not to allow this. But it's good to know. It's good to know on both sides. For one thing, white can play so that black can't play certain moves because it allows this, and black can play so that white can't. Black should play so that white will never have this opportunity. So both sides have to be aware of this, even if it doesn't come up very often in a real game. And here, as many of you know, is the standard Greek, what's called the Greek bishop sacrifice, because it happens in so many different openings and positions. It goes way, way back. It's bishop takes check. And we talked about this once on this show, what the kind of the rules are about this sacrifice, whether it works or not. The first rule is that if black goes back and white plays here, black better be able to either play knight f6, attacking the queen and defending h7, or play bishop d3, or play queen c2, play something that puts him on this diagonal, or play bishop f5, play something that covers the h7 square. Because normally, if you move the rook out of the way, there's going to be something really simple. I mean, in this case, let's see if we can figure this out. Oh, well, it's actually very easy here because you've got an extra piece coming up. And that's the other thing I wanted to say about this position. If you're looking at bishop h7 checks, sacrifices, and you're not sure, maybe you're even in time trouble or it's blitz or something, you want to decide whether they're going to work. If you have an extra rook that comes up right away out to the king side, there's a good chance it's not going to work. Very good chance that that's going to work. So that's kind of a good general rule here. So anyway, this wins because of checkmate happening, and there's no real good defense. So black has to go forward. Well, if black goes, I don't know, where else can black go? I guess black can go to h6, but then you can just ignore that because a rook and a queen are always going to mate the king in the open board. Now you're threatening check. The best move is probably, taking is just completely ridiculous because check is going to be a quick mate. So actually black can last for a while playing this way, check, and then running back again. But with all these pieces attacking, now maybe queen g4, there's probably a lot of wins here, but the easiest one is here because it threatens to go here and start checkmating this way. In fact, it threatens mate in a couple, doesn't it? Because of rook h8 check. So I don't know if there's even anything much to look at here. Well, I guess here, because then the king has an escape square. So queen here. And good luck surviving this, everybody. This is just going to be, you're going to win at least massive, massive material. So just to show you examples of this. So black plays king g6, which I think is the toughest move. That's a good move. And white, sure enough, is going to play rook g3. So that's Elliott's idea. And Elliott's an experienced player and knows that this sacrifice might not have worked if there wasn't a rook lift. Now, maybe it would have worked anyway. Sometimes you can actually play a position like this, play a move like queen g4, and then very slowly bring a rook over and up. Or maybe play f4 and bring a rook up to f3 and over. But when the rook's already poised to go to c3, I don't think he had to spend too much time calculating any concrete variations here, because that's just too many pieces. Once again, look where all of black's pieces are. Too far from the king side, and the king is exposed. So Kasparov would just say, well, you really don't have to calculate things like this. Okay, black tries f6. That's a good try. I'm sorry, plays knight takes here first. This was a possibility, but if nothing else, white has that move. Rook here, queen coming in, knight coming back, pawn coming up. Way too many things to attack. Might have been better, though. He plays knight takes first. The idea is that if queen takes, maybe he can fork or something, I guess. But Elliott is merciless, plays rook g3, threatening a discovered attack. Black tries to sneak out with the king. White plays check. Black does sneak out with the king. White plays check, and now I guess f4. Oh wait, he wins the queen, sorry. But there was no choice there. There was no way to get out of this. So now f4, winning an extra piece. So the material is not absolutely hopeless for black, but the king is still exposed. And the material's not good either. So I don't think we have to see too much more. I'll just kind of whip through the moves. Check. See, the king's too exposed. The rook and a queen are usually going to you can almost count on that being a win. And, okay, so black gave up. No, black didn't give up. Oh, my fault. Black gave up a couple moves ago, but this was what Jeremy showed as being a possible finish. All right, very good, very fun. And you all should know about those bishop h7 check attacks. Not because you'll actually get them against a good player, but that you'll be able to threaten having those in reserve, and that'll force the good player to make some defensive move that he doesn't want to make. And vice versa. On the other side, you've got to know about them because you have to be always aware that you can't make moves that are going to allow a bishop h7 sacrifice. All right. Okay, what else do we have here? We've got, that's Correspondence Games, that's Elliot's game. Here's one, let's see what we've got on the chat first. What's the name of the opening where white plays e4, knight, f3, g3, bishop g2, and what are the ideas? Probably e4 would come later. You can't usually get g3 and bishop g2 in. Usually, yeah, it's King's Indian attack is usually the name, but e4 won't usually come first unless maybe it's a French defense or something like that. I think that's the only exception. Let me just put a board up. In fact, what's the next? Let me just see what a good. Okay, let's do this. Let me put a board up that I can use later anyway, because it's a game from one of you guys actually, and hopefully we'll get to it. Okay. The question is what's involves this move, this move, this move, and this move. And normally that's called a King's Indian attack, especially if you play d3 also, because it's analogous to the King's Indian defense, which goes g3, bishop g7, d6, and then often e5, which would be the equivalent of e4 as white. Now you can't really get the King's Indian attack by playing e4 first, except against the French defense, where often you can get it, because you can play something like this, and then you can play knight f3, g3. Let me just make some silly moves. Traditionally, black plays this kind of move, or c5 or something. This is called the King's Indian attack, and that's because white has here a King's Indian position, right? It's as if he's playing black with an extra tempo. Okay, and all I wanted to say is if you play e4 first, you're probably not going to get that in too many cases. I mean, you could get it against a Sicilian sometimes, but it has, well, you can get it against a Sicilian. It just doesn't often work that well because black gets an early d5 in. But against some normal opening like that, you're not going to get it because black's going to have immediate play. For example, here, that's an awfully slow move against that because it attacks here. And then after that, who knows, maybe you're going to have bishop here. And then if white tries to get out, I guess you have knight g4, don't you? Does that work? No, actually it's nothing special at all. What am I saying? And bishop takes doesn't work either. Wow, nobody ever plays it in this order. Why is that? Let me see. Maybe there's a d5 or an f5. Ah, another great question. We always get all these great questions. What did I say about this? Here. You can always play d5 now, by the way, with a complete equality. This is not really a Philidor's. Well, it is if he takes. If he takes, you've got kind of a reverse Philidor's. And that would be okay for white. That's an interesting line for white. It's not a King's Indian attack anymore. Let me see what else is of interest here. Wait a minute. Is f5 completely crazy? If bishop c5, bishop here, yeah, that's not that interesting. d5, sort of threatens e4, but you get knight c3 in first. This is actually complicated because of this position. This is kind of a center game reverse. Probably not too bad for black, but not that great. Nothing decisive or anything. Now, how about f5? Is that just crazy? King's Gambit kind of move? Interesting. So this is actually a good question. You know, I never really realized that you could play the King's Indian attack theoretically, even against e4, e5. Now, of course, you couldn't play it against this. You wouldn't want to play it because this is hanging, right? And this time, I think he really would start making, well, my transpose. So interesting. Okay. Don't know what else to say about that, but that's basically King's Indian attack. And what I was going to say is the way people usually play the King's Indian attack and the way it's listed in the database is playing this first. And then after, for example, this move, you just play these moves. And then you play this move. And no matter what black does, you pretty much play for d3 next. you play king's Indian attack. And that's true even if black doesn't play c5, plays something like bishop g4 or something. This is still a king's Indian attack, this kind of position. Okay, I guess that kind of opening just gives black the white pieces. White gives up any opening advantage. I think that's the general thing, but on the other hand, if you play it with knight f3 first, you have the flexibility of not playing the king's Indian attack, depending what black does. And if black plays d5 and you play g3, well, this is something Kramnik's been playing. There's a lot of good players have been playing this recently. This is a version that people kind of like, once d5 is committed to by black, as opposed to c5, for example. So this particular king's Indian attack is fairly popular now. It's true that white doesn't really believe he's going to get any advantage, but he does get an interesting playable game. That's called the London system for black. It's the London reversed, right? This is one system that black plays sometimes, and you know, this kind of thing. Also, white plays c4 here as well as knight d2. And anyway, so yeah, king's Indian attack is the right answer there. Okay, Magnus plays 26 plays e4, knight f3, g3. He tends to play knight f3 first and then g3, like a lot of players, a lot of king's Indian attack players. There are a few. I wonder which opening you're talking about where he plays that. Maybe in the French. Maybe in the French he sometimes plays king's Indian attack. You're probably right. It's not coming to mind immediately which opening you would play that in. I mean, you probably wouldn't play it against the Pirates exactly, because it doesn't really make any sense to play these moves before d4. And you wouldn't play it against the Scandinavian because you'd lose a pawn or something. You can play it against the Sicilian, but it's just not that. It depends what black does. I mean, you can play it against, for example, knight c6. You can play here. But, you know, black's very happy to have positions like this. It is kind of giving up a tempo. But you can play it for white, sure. Sure, you can always play those moves. Interesting. Magnus in the opening often is just trying to kind of get a game and hoping that the opponent doesn't know much about it. Okay, so let me just see here. Okay, so there's no more questions that I see offhand. So let me get on to some of the other stuff that you guys have been sending. Let me make sure that I haven't just missed something big, because I often do. I don't have my chat thing working. There it is. Aha, there's Moving Dutchman. We always like seeing him. All right, okay, so the next thing was an older question that I've always meant to answer, and I don't really have a great answer, but I thought it'd be interesting for you guys to talk about. Hi, John, love the show. Please answer on air. What's your opinion of chess 960? I love it. I see it not as a variant of chess, but an expansion of chess to its full capacity. Why do you think it isn't more popular? Just tradition, question mark? So most of you know what chess 960 is. It has to do with on the beginning moves, you distribute these pieces along the last rank almost randomly. Sometimes it's called random. And then you just start the game. So it's a normal chess game, except you start the game with these, and there's a few rules about how you can set the pieces up, but not too many. I mean, basically you're randomly distributing those games along the first rank. And obviously that takes you out of traditional opening theory, unless you happen to randomly distribute them in this position, which can happen, of course, but isn't going to happen very often. So my answer to that is I'm not really a huge fan of 960. A lot of the top players of the world have actually played it, and people have sponsored tournaments with it. And those games are fun to look at. I think it's fun and it's challenging. I personally, I do see it as a variant of chess. I think it's just like a lot of other variants. There's tons of other alternate chess games which add an extra dimension of complication by either changing the powers of the pieces, or they keep the powers of the pieces the same, but they add a row, or they start out with a different beginning position, or there's books on variants of chess, and it goes on and on and on. And I think it's very easy to come up with improvements to chess in the sense that you can add more possibilities and more complications and have a sort of a richer game, at least in theory. The problem is, and there's a reason that these variants never catch on, because it's what makes chess a great game. It's not this starting position. It's the fact that we now have tremendous centuries of accumulated knowledge and experience with chess, and knowing all this knowledge of all these kinds of positions and tactics and strategies means that you can do things that are really truly creative. You know, if you just played this tomorrow, chess was invented, and someone sat down and said, "Here's the rules, play a game." You really couldn't do anything profound or creative because you wouldn't know enough to do something really fascinating or interesting. What makes chess fascinating and interesting is the fact that we do know so much about it, and yet there's more that we don't know than we do know. So it's got that wonderful combination of where to do something interesting or original or creative is in the context of knowing what would be normal or what would be sort of routine or what would make sense or what your opponent wouldn't expect because in fact he knows which moves are usually good or which ones aren't usually good. So I don't think 960 would work. Now, if you played 30 years of 960 with all the top players of the world and all the lower players of the world and built up an accumulated experience of positions from all these different starting positions, then it would start to have a lot more interest because people would go, wow, yeah, I kind of understand that. I know why those moves make sense from that beginning position and why that structure is desirable or undesirable. But I see that I'm kind of freezing on my screen here, so let me refresh that. Do a little quick maintenance here so I can make sure what's coming through on the screen. Um, yeah, let me just do this for a second. Okay, get back to that. Be with you in a second. Here we go. Okay, so 960 is a fine game, but I don't know if it's much better than any of the other chess variants. Um, and in a sense, what it's trying to do is just prevent opening theory from meaning anything. But the problem with that is opening theory is a major, major part of the game. In a way, the opening is the most interesting part of the game. You could think of it that way anyway, because the opening has because there's more pieces on the board and there's more possibilities. So the first 15 moves or so, the deeper you get into the game, the fewer possibilities there are. So, for example, computers really can't handle openings at all. I mean, they're usually given a huge book so that they can handle them, and any complicated opening solution computers have trouble with any really messy sort of opening. And the reason being that the minute they get fewer pieces on the board, their horizon gets longer, they have fewer things to look at, and they become more and more brilliant and much, much better than human beings. So you don't want to just eliminate the opening, which is kind of the idea of shuffling the pieces on the first rank, is to eliminate memorization. But that would be like taking any sport, for example, and getting rid of all the skills that have already been developed by inventing some new rules that make those skills useless. Or all the experience, or to make experience useless. Why would you want to make experience useless in any endeavor? Because that's what makes it interesting. It's the experience that makes the game interesting. So, but having said all that, I still enjoy playing over some of the 960 games, and they're certainly the same players that play great chess seem to play awfully good 960 chess too. So, okay, that's my take. So, what do you guys think about 960? Any sort of comments? I thought I'd see some comments. Um, Okay, repeat from earlier. What about e4, d6? Okay, d4, knight f6, knight c3, c6. That is played sometimes. With the idea of not fianchetting the king bishop. If knight f3, bishop g4, and white can set up with e6 and d5 like in a French defense with a bishop outside of the pawn chain. Very good question. A little related to what I said the couple weeks ago. We were talking about my game with Timur Gariv and some other players where I played, I know this isn't exactly the same, but it's kind of similar. And I've decided that here I'm not going to play that silly queen d3 move I played, and I could play here. And now we're pretty much transposing, aren't we? For example, if black played c6 here, it'd be the exact same position. So I guess I kind of like white in these positions a little bit because he has more space. But it's certainly playable for black, absolutely. In fact, we might have gotten that position if I played e4 in this position. So it actually sort of transposes to another possibility. Now let me go back and let's go to the actual question, which is c6 right away. Now the thing is, you don't have to play knight f3. You can play f4, and this line here is called the check variation of the Peertz defense. And I have always liked this for white when I looked at it carefully. And there have been just tons and tons of games with this and a lot of theory involving a lot of times the move e5. I think white usually plays bishop d3 just to stop this. And then black can even play the move e5 right away. I think he usually does, if I'm not mistaken. And if knight f3, you have this move, bishop g4, and the theory goes on and on and on. I think the reason that, now this has been played by some very strong players, but it's gotten much less popular, I would say, over the last 4 or 5 years. And I think that's because this move just turned out to be too strong. If white really knows what he's doing and it's no longer a big surprise, you have to figure out what you're doing. Now black could start trying to, for example, counterattack like this, maybe. But white's got a big lead in development in the center, so it's kind of scary. Even this move is probably pretty scary. Or maybe a3 first. Probably this first, though. It's interesting that how this would relate to Tiger's variation, where you play this move a6 early, right? I mean, usually he plays g6, obviously, but so it's not like Tiger's, but maybe this would make more sense if you're trying to play an early b5 than c6 would. c6 is really mainly played in order to get this queen a5 idea going. And so I think the answer to that is, yeah, this is quite reasonable for black. Makes a lot of sense, but white probably has a small advantage because you're going to get two bishops, or you're going to just have the bigger center. And I've looked at a few games in that position, but the real problem is this. The real problem with this move order is this, and you know, there's whole pamphlets or books or DVDs or whatever lectures on playing this check variation, but I think you'll find that it's dangerous. White can get his center moving quickly, and you can get in trouble. Okay, what else do we have here? I think 960 is very interesting. Yeah, okay, I agree with you. I think it is interesting. Benjamin B. Brown with this kind of setup a long time ago. Yeah, Benjamin likes things like this. I can see that. That Benjamin liked a lot of solid. He liked to play very solidly. He played a lot of openings where maybe he played an early G6, and just do not take over the center. Just get his pieces out. And he even played, as I think we mentioned in the show before, he even played this line where you lure the center forward and go back. Just very solid play. And then he'd play bishop here and here and here, and then put the bishop out somewhere here if he could. And yeah, and just being a brilliant positional player. By the way, Joel Benjamin's game of the week, not game of the week, review of the week lectures are really excellent. They're on ICC. If you're an ICC member, you should watch those. It's a lot of fun. It gives the latest chess news, but with a couple of really nicely annotated games. I really recommend them. They're really great. Okay, oh, we're getting some comments. How do you learn to coordinate your pieces? Is this just experience, a result of a good opening, or something else? I think it's experience is a very good answer to that question. How to coordinate your pieces? Yeah, I think coordination by itself is a kind of vague term, and what it reflects is the ability to put your pieces on squares where they don't walk all over each other, and where they do good things, and they have a future. They all have a future. They don't block each other off. They don't have to retreat soon once they get out. It's just handling your pieces so that they coordinate, literally, well together. So they operate well together. Well, how are you going to get that? Well, you're going to get that with a lot of study of chess and experience. Yeah, because you're going to see a lot of times when the pieces don't work together, and you're going to you're going to get an understanding of how that happened. How it was that good players managed to get their pieces out without them getting in each other's way. Very good question, interesting question. Unfortunately, I don't think there's no book or essay, or there's no verbal advice that's going to really tell you that. Alan Llewellyn, what's the best line against the Samish King's Indian that doesn't involve an early c5? Okay, let's take a quick look at that. The King's Indian, whoops. So, and then I'll have to get to some of the games and other things that you guys have sent me. King's Indian here. That doesn't, the Samish variation. Here's the Samish. We talked about this extensively in the last couple of weeks, so you can go back and look at that. Okay, what are some, well, e5 is still playable. It's, Kasparov had made a living off of playing e5 for a while, before he switched to c5, actually. He won a lot of games with e5. There's nothing wrong with that move at all. And, and then even this line, I think, is still considered completely solid and sound. And if you look at like Lars Schandorf's book about how to beat the Samish, you'll get a lot of these positions where white's playing g4 and h4 and black's playing h5 and things like that. And I think you can improve on those for black. White gets an advantage in those examples, but I think in fact, black's okay in those positions. So that's the most obvious answer. Now there's a lot of other answers. You can play this first and then c5 if you don't want to gambit a pawn, or and then e5. This is a good flexible move. I used to play knight bd7. I've played knight c6 and written a book about it. I wrote about a 100-page book or so, pamphlet on this, 40 years ago or so. I beat Gowan Jones playing this. He's a 2700 player or something. Of course, needless to say, he's a lot better player than I am, but he had an off day, and I played well. And this is a fun line. It's called the Pano. And one of the ideas is if you start kicking this knight around, it actually has some pretty good squares to go to. So usually white plays this first, and then you can play a slow move. And then you can play for rook b8 and b5, but you can also sometimes play e5, e6. There's all kinds of possibilities. Very flexible line. That's one of the main lines. I think it's still sound. It's better than its reputation, I think. I think it still works out. It's a little risky. You probably won't see it on top that much because this is so much more reliable. And some people play a6 here. I think Yermolinsky played that. And one of the ideas is to play b6, c6, and b5, but I think that I really like playing the white side of those lines. I think they're overrated for black. A lot of books will actually recommend playing this way, and I think they're crazy. I think white just gets too much development. I've won some very pretty games as white in that kind of position. So, but if you do play a6, you don't have to play c6. You can play other moves now. You can play knight here, for example. Here is a nice, good, flexible move. And what else is played here? I don't think e5 is played here. But c6, I just don't like this. I've never liked this line very much. Even just moves like knight c1 and then just getting your pieces out are pretty good. A position like this, for example. Is that the one I like? Or no, knight b3, I guess. No, I can't remember, but I tend to like white in these positions. You can also, let me see, what else can you do here? Okay, so those are a few ideas. My recommendations, if you don't want to play c5, would be look at either e5 or knight c6. They're both fun, too. It's fun to play against the same, which I think that's one reason that white doesn't play it more often. Not that it isn't good for white, but it's what black has so many nice systems. Ah, there we go. Alan is saying that. I don't like that system. It is very slow, and it's especially bad for you, Alan, because as we saw earlier, you have a tendency not to develop your pieces and not to take the center, not to put a pawn in the center. So definitely not a good idea for you to do that. You'll get checkmated a bunch, and probably not the right thing to do. First, learn the developing and central lines, and then you can learn fancy stuff like that if you're still inclined to do so. I'm trying to get a handle on facing the French as white. Any good suggestions? I'm asked this all the time, and we've had some ideas for white. Well, we just looked at one of them, Sharash. It's a pretty solid, good line to play. It's fairly safe. Let me go back another one, which is here, 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 here. And for example, we just talked about this line with knight f3, which is what Elliot won that beautiful, brilliant game with. And against this, you can play, well, there's a number of things you can do, but one thing you can do is just develop quickly and get your pieces out and attack like that. Or play f4. Sometimes people play f4. So I guess I'd say Tarrasch is a pretty good idea. There's plenty of things to do. I always played knight c3, but I knew a lot of theory too. I really enjoyed the white side of knight c3 actually. I just enjoyed playing it, but that was just me. The queen g4 line, I guess you mean the advanced variation queen g4. Yeah, I just don't believe in it. I mean, it's playable, but there's a lot of good answers. You can do it and see how long you get away with it. If you're playing good players, they'll tend to punish it. The queen's exposed, and they usually know. I know several concrete lines against this that I think are pretty good. But that doesn't mean you can't try it. It's kind of fun. The idea, well, I don't think we need to go into that too much because I want to get to people's games. The next thing I was going to show you is a reader game. We showed Elliot's, which is a viewer game, and now we've got this game Gutham and Sachen that was sent to me. Let's just take a look at it. Another French. Sorry about that. I'd forgotten that this was a French. And here's what white plays in this game: an exchange variation. And so this was a game sent to me by email. The idea of h3 is to play knight f3 without bishop g4. Black is our reader. What is his name? Sachen Saju, I think it is, or Sachen Seju. So black is just developing pieces. That's a little early. Maybe that would be a nice response at some point, for example. There's no real reason to play bishop e6 because you don't really have to develop yet. Okay, so but I'm not going to argue with this. We'll just play some moves here. Okay, white's getting his pieces out, coordinating well. Black's thinking about playing c5. Finally castles. Could have castled a long time ago. Okay, d takes c is not an impressive move because this is with tempo and also controls that square. But white's got a perfectly good game, and so does black. That's an interesting move. It sort of discourages this. Maybe it prepares this later. It's an interesting move. I don't know if it's the best move. One problem with white's position here is that white has no, white's not going to lose this game unless he makes a lot of mistakes. But one thing black can do is just challenge this, and then it's very hard for white to get a really good game because black's got aggressive pieces to make up for his isolated pawn. But anyway, black just makes a good move. White takes over, blockades the d4 square, and black defends. I think here it might make more sense to just move this bishop. Well, although he's not really threatening to take it, is he? So maybe rook e8 or bishop d6 or something. I don't know. Queen b6 seems like a funny move. Okay. We'll just keep making moves here. Okay, so white has some pieces kind of looking over there, and that queen is kind of over on the queen's side. So black's going to be a little careful not to be attacked here. On the other hand, this bishop is not available to play a move like bishop takes h6 or something. So black plays back. That's probably a good idea. Just challenge that queen before it causes trouble. Queen retreats because white still wants to attack. Black develops, and then white takes, and that's usually going to make things really easy. I would do something else as white because that really helps black's activity. Also, this piece is better than that piece. That's a bad bishop. Remember, the definition of a bad bishop is that it's on the same color as the center pawn, and in this case, the same color as this pawn too. So so white should just kind of develop, maybe play here. It's not like white's winning, but I think he stands a little better here. He's got some things to do. By taking, he's really giving up. Now black could take probably any way. He took this way, probably the worst way, I think. It's very tempting because he gets a central majority, but playing there is very nice, very nicely centralized piece there with the knight, and threatens d4 also. That would be fully equal, and there's nothing wrong with this. It threatens rook. Well, I don't know what it threatens, but it threatens maybe to double rooks and take over the file. So knight takes e6 is very unimpressive. Don't like that answer as much, but it's not terrible. Now black starts kind of goofing around. Oh, that's not a very good move because white could play knight here, and then he's threatening to just take over that big outpost in the center of the board. But he doesn't do that. He plays f3. Black could play e5 anywhere along here. But instead he starts pushing his queenside pawns, which is fine. And now I think he should continue attacking on the queenside with this minority attack. That's probably a very good move, just to break down, threaten to isolate that pawn. And if white takes, well, this is kind of very nice for black because he's got that long thing. He also has potentially the a file. So he's fully equal here, I think. But he didn't play that. He played a4. And so they're basically, both sides are just sort of making moves. Now that pawn's attacked, so that's kind of important. And black plays e5. I don't know if that's, he should have played e5 a long time ago, I think. Probably rook c6 a little safer, just defend that. But I don't know, it's still probably okay. White's trying to use the fact that these are not only strong because they're next to each other in the center, but they're also a little weak because they're kind of loose. They aren't supported very well by black's pieces is the problem. So black gets out of the pin and defends d5, maybe thinks about playing e4. White attacks this for a second time, and black tries to counterattack with this move e4. I think it actually doesn't work at all because white could simply take this, and black can't take back because the knight's hanging. There's no real attack in this direction. So that was kind of a mistake, but white didn't do that. White played there instead. Black took, threatening check. Check there. And black's playing well now because these are weaknesses, and he's got the knight coming here in a lot of cases. So black is better here, not a lot, but because there's not much material left. White defends that pawn, and you know nothing huge and interestingly happens later on in the game. So I think I'll just stop there, just because we want to save time to look at other things. We're already almost at my 4 o'clock. That's Pacific time. Let me see. So I think I'll just stop there. A kind of fun, interesting, well-played game. I don't know, you know, for the ratings of the opponents, I would say that was a very, very well-played game. You know, one of the main things in chess is to hang on to your pieces and make good, logical, developing moves. Make threats when you can, and that's what both sides did here. And the game was drawn, by the way, I should have mentioned. There was nothing incredibly exciting that happened after this, although there's a lot a lot going on. In fact, he probably wants me to show the rest of the game because there are the kings are kind of running around and there's perpetual checks and all kinds of interesting things happening. But I don't want to take the whole. It's just too long a game to show in full. Okay, so Colin's asking something, but actually I had something from Colin that he asked last week or sent by email. I can't remember. No, it was from the chat. So let me look at that first, and then maybe I'll answer his next question. But let me look at the one from last week first. He asked about what was it? This early bishop g5 and the queen's Indian, Nimzo Indian sort of thing. Um, and then I still have another reader game that maybe we'll get to, or viewer game. This is what Colin asked about. You'll recognize this, Colin. He asked about, okay, so this is a normal queen's Indian defense. We've looked at that before, and white played here, and Colin was black. He said, he was in this game, he said, I played bishop a6, but don't know if that was best. How would you approach? So the most natural and popular move is just this, and then if white wants to, he can go back into a main line of the Nimzo Indian with this kind of move. You can also play bishop e7, but this is sort of a big old well-known main line. And black, I think, is pretty happy in these positions. But you may not be happy with that. If you want to do something else, I think you can just play fairly slowly with the move bishop e7, but white probably stands a little tiny bit better. Now white can also play there trying to avoid getting pinned with bishop b4, but then the knight's passively placed, so almost any move is good. Maybe just here and castles, and then you just attack the bishop. And then the knight isn't supporting the move d5 or anything in the center, so he's sort of backwards here. So bishop e7 is fine, and that's what's normally played. Instead of that, what would we... I would mention, oh yeah, there is one interesting line. If bishop b7, e3, this is a good trick to know. e3, you can play bishop b4 check. And if he plays knight here now, oh, I'm sorry, let's play h6 first. This is a good trick to know. h6, now if he gives up the bishop pair for nothing, most people are going to be very happy for black because white has no particular advantage. There's no outposts, not particularly, he has a little bit of space, so he might be equal, but he's certainly not better. And in the long run, those bishops can hurt you, especially in the endgame. So most people are going to go back here. And then you check. And now white has to be really careful. White should just play here and go back into one of the main lines of the Nimzo Indian. But if he plays here, it looks very attractive because you can't double his pawns. But it's actually a terrible move. And there, several games have had this and have gone here. Shabalov was black in one of them. Has gone here, here, and then here. And the problem is wherever the knight goes, you have knight e4 and there's no way to defend this knight. It's really that simple. I mean, there's a few weird little complications, but they're all just terrible. They're all bad. So here, one game went, Shabalov had a game that went like here, takes, check, here. Actually, the guy went here, I think. He probably should go king e2, but it's going to be way down anyway in material. And now this nice move here. And that just stops any possible counterattack. And black's piece up. So... what else? So don't fall for this. So that's one way to play it for black. That's what I would do. But bishop a6, what you played is actually pretty reasonable. I mean, there's nothing really wrong with it. Black actually played this move, and white played here. Now, white could just play here, a little more flexible, and then I would attack this. And once the knight's committed to d2, one thing you can do is just come back again. Remember, we saw that in other variations. The whole idea of bishop a6 is to commit white to play some move he doesn't want to play, either queen c2 or knight c2. And then you can come back to the long diagonal, just like those other lines we looked at a few weeks ago, and the ones that Colin was actually asking about. And I don't know what else we need to see here. One kind of interesting, weird thing white can do is give up the bishop pair in order to get the center. He could play this right now, which defends that pawn, which is attacked here, and maybe threatens to go here, but black plays h6 and forces white to take, because if white retreats, he loses this pawn for nothing. And that's a center pawn. So white would take, and this time, white's pieces are a little better placed here. This center is a little more impressive looking than the other one, and the bishop looks a little silly here, and it's probably going to have to retreat. So this time black has two bishops, and is probably equal, but at least white has something to play for. White's got a nice big space advantage in the center. One idea for black is to play like this in these positions, and then play bishop g7, and even threaten g4 in some positions. I think black's completely equal, but nothing inspiring. Against a move like this, that's also probably a good move because d4 is hanging after g4. So, and if e5, you probably want to go this way. So, and then you can break up the center like that. Also, the bishop can still go to a good square like that in some cases, and g4 can still be a threat. So that's about equal, but it's an interesting line. This game, let me just show you how this game went. It went e3, just protecting that pawn, which was attacked by the bishop. And black played d5. I don't necessarily think d5 is the best. I think it's probably better to just play this move, same old thing that we just looked at, and then play this check, just like we talked about. And this still loses. Knight d2 still loses. So he's going to have to play knight c3. And then if you want to, you can play here and knight e4 and see what the kind of position that. Now this position's better with a bishop here. So probably white has some advantage here. But it's one way you could play it. d5 is a funny move. It looks logical because it seems to stop him from castling. Because if white plays c takes d, then black takes and white can't castle anymore because he has to take with the rook or the king, in this case the king. It just turns out that if you look at this position, it's actually pretty good for white positionally. White's weakened his queenside light squares. He's taken a lot of time. He's behind in development, and the king is going to be very safe over here on the light squares because there's no light square bishop to attack it. So white has a positional advantage here. It's not huge, but it's good enough that I wouldn't want to be black here. So I'm not thrilled with d5. I think c takes d is a good answer, even though it looks stupid at first sight. In the game, you could also play tons of other stuff. I think he played knight d2, yeah. You could also just play knight c3 because after all, if bishop takes, then bishop takes, then pawn takes, and then queen a4 check, and you take that pawn back, and you have two center pawns to one, some advantage. And if pawn takes, black stays a pawn ahead, but probably not for very long. White can play here, threatening queen f3 and threatening bishop takes c4. So I'm not impressed with d5. In the game he played here, which is kind of passive, and now maybe black's reasonably okay. He just simplified. Played here, attacking the knight, and the knight came back as good as anything. Knight came here to defend this knight. White played castles, h6. And, you know, white can try something like well, I'm not going to go into detail. White has some tiny advantage maybe, but he soon gives it away. Now black's counterattacking in the center, so he's probably completely equal, I think. White's trying to get this move e4 in. Right now it's covered by two pieces, but now it would be supported by two pieces. Black captures, and white plays e4, but temporarily he's still the pawn down. And white plays there. He probably should go ahead and take this. It turns out e5 is not that good. You know, that seems weird. Just to explain that. This is actually a very dangerous attack, this kind of attack. Probably almost winning for white, or at least very strong for white, even though he's a piece down. Something to know, maybe. Instead, he played queen a4, b4, nice move. Queen back, and now the bishop should go the natural way here, hanging onto this pawn, but he didn't. He went back the other way. And it was just a game for a while. He got rid of that bishop. Good idea. Now bishop versus knight with pawns on both sides of the board. You know, black's got to be okay here, if not better than okay. White's not playing the best moves, by the way, but. And then white tries to reorganize. Black tries to exchange. And black does exchange. And white plays that move. That's an odd move. It's probably a pretty weak move. The problem is this queen is attacking this, and black owns this d file. So right now black's quite a bit better, actually. The knight's fairly passive, the rook's fairly passive, and black owns the d file. Really, I don't know how that happened exactly. White just played too passively. Black gets a nice active move, rook d4. Black's playing this very, very well. Black is our viewer. And now white's problem is that this is a little weak and that's a little weak. And black has no real weaknesses. Maybe b5. And he has bishop versus knight, which tends to be an advantage in the endgame. Now that pawn is falling. And Both sides are just sort of throwing pieces around here, but anyway, black is doing better and better. This is a passed pawn, so now black's really completely winning. He's a pawn up for nothing. Actually, this is even hanging in some lines. So I don't know if there was any more excitement. I think there was. Oh no, this is quite easy. And so black eventually shepherded. Oh, he won another pawn, and then shepherded his own pawn in eventually. I don't know what's going on there. Ah, and the knight's almost trapped. So, oh, here's the idea. If check, for example, only obvious move, then king up, and you're threatening e4, e3, e2, e1, and this is still a real problem. Okay, folks. So, what else we got? Let's go back to the chat. I don't think we'll have time to show the other last game because it's too late. But I'm going to show you another reader game and answer a few more questions next time, and then we'll get some new questions from the chat. Oh my God, all of a sudden everybody's talking. Are there any glaring weaknesses based on a d4 repertoire around f3? Yeah, I'm not that thrilled with it. Hans Berliner, of course, his entire repertoire that he had as white to basically to win, to get an advantage in every opening, was to play f3 in every opening. He said it was a mistake to play knight f3, which was kind of silly. It would have been nice if he had backed this up because his analysis didn't show it at all. But still, this is game. It's called The System, or My System, The System, by Hans Berliner. He plays d4, and then he always plays f3 later in every opening. Um, but his analysis is really terrible. He shows white getting an advantage in the Grunfeld and the King's Indian and the Queen's Gambit decline in every other opening by simply playing f3 at some point. But you can certainly do it. Yeah, the same as you could play f3, Nimzo Indian. I think he actually skipped the Nimzo Indian because the f3 system at the time especially wasn't thought to be worth much of anything. It's become quite popular. So you could play this here. It's become quite popular, but it's also black's solutions have been found recently. And right now, white's a little bit on the defensive in these lines because you are taking a long time to get your pieces out. But it's a playable line. You know, for years, Yakovich, you know, he just won game after game with f3 just because people didn't know it that well. There have been some classic, wonderful games. We saw the Anand Carlsen last week. Remember, we looked at that was an f3 game. The Carlsen game. We looked at this. Did we look at this? Yeah, some sort of with the e3 bishop d3 idea, and a3 was in. That's right. So that game went a3 takes, maybe castles, maybe c5, and then here. Remember? So we looked at this game. We looked at that. There was a c4. Actually, the timing's a little different because it was black's move, and he got c4 in before white managed to stop it, or managed to get bishop d3 in. So. Yeah, you can play it against everything. You can play the same-ish. You can play, but it just depends on your taste. One thing about f3 is it's slow and it stops the knight from coming to its probably best square in a lot of openings. So the problem with that, you're taking a couple moves to set up your center. That's an extra pawn move, and of course that means black's going to be ahead in development in a lot of lines. Because black's ahead in development in a lot of these queen pawn openings anyway. You know, the King's Indian or something. White's getting the center, but he's losing time. And black's getting a lot of pieces out really fast, right? And if you play the same-ish, for example, black's got 3 pieces out, and white's only got 1, and white moved first, so that's kind of a strange thing. Nevertheless, white's center is so good that it makes up for his loss of development. But that's what you have to deal with. You're gonna face a lot of tactical attacks by black if you play that way. But if you play it well, it's a great, you know, same-ish is a wonderful opening. I've been studying Rubinstein, Alyakin, Bronstein, Carey, Stahl, and eventually Fischer and Kasparov. Of those players, who was your favorite? Yeah, you know, I never know how to answer that question because I like a lot of the traditional players. When I was growing up, of course, I just loved Tal because of his speculative attacks, and that's how I played. And I just adored that. Alyakin, I always liked Alyakin. Alyakin played all kinds of wonderful attacks and had a real dynamic attitude towards chess. I really liked that. They all have great things. I admire Kasparov so much for what he did at that late stage of chess. To be able to play so dynamically was almost miraculous. A real genius, Kasparov. And you know, I like pretty much all the world champions, and I love Petrosian. So of those players that you mentioned, I would say Tal, Alyakin, and Kasparov would be my favorites. And the very favorite, I don't know. I'll be sentimental and say Tal. who has, by the way, a wonderful book of games that I've mentioned before, Tal's Selected Games, definitely worth reading. Alyekin isn't helpful because the standard of defense by his opponents was bad. Well, you could say that about Rubinstein too, um, but I think some people think it's wonderful to study Alyekin. It just depends. Sometimes you learn a lot because the defense maybe wasn't quite as good or quite as interesting, and so you can see how to exploit a slightly inferior defense. So I think you can learn from any world champion. I grew up, those are the people I studied when I was growing up. I didn't know anything about openings. I just studied world champions because those were the books I could get. He played a match against Koppa, you can't call him a bad defender. No, he means that his opponent's defenders were weaker. That's what Alan means. It's true, the Russians of the 50s did improve dramatically. Alyekin was one of the first, and I think the players today are better than any players we've ever seen. Alyekin was one of the first to prepare openings carefully and work on them. Yes, that's true. Even better theoretician was Rubinstein. Yeah, but Rubinstein was a very narrow set of openings that he played. He knew them really well, and he played them really well, but there weren't as many of them. So I would think of Alyekin as being a more interesting theoretician, a more broad theoretician, sort of in the Botvinnik sense or the Fischer sense. They played a lot of openings that they knew really deeply. Rubinstein tended to know a few somewhat simpler openings, although they're pretty complex. Rubinstein was a genius, great player. But I wouldn't think of him as being a particularly outstanding theoretician just because what he studied was on a more narrow range. Same thing with Capablanca, actually. Not really a fantastic theoretician, but he knew what he played. He knew it extremely well. It's interesting that so many so-called Smyslov system in Spanish was invented by Rubinstein 30 to 40 years earlier. I didn't know that. That's the interesting. He's talking about the well, actually, there's a couple Smyslov systems, but so we'll have to think which one. Actually, there's three or four Smyslov systems. One thing is sometimes called the Smyslov system is that. I don't know if you know that, but that G6 line is sometimes called the Smyslov. There's the mainline Smyslov, the one that goes way into Rookie 8 and blah blah blah. This kind of thing. The Smyslov that goes, is it Rookie 8 now? Or H6 and D4 Rookie 8 and Bishop F8. There's that line. I can imagine Rubinstein playing that. I think there's another Smyslov system in the Ruy Lopez, isn't there? Of course, he played the open Ruy sometimes too. Smyslov and the Ruy Lopez. What am I thinking? You could be right. Maybe it's just those two. But I didn't know Rubinstein played anything earlier than Smyslov, and that's actually really nice. Rubinstein's system against the Nimzo is very solid and used by the best players. That's true. On the other hand, it's a pretty obvious move. I would get the Russian chess primer if I were you. Okay, Soviet chess school was a big boost to chess. That's true, absolutely. I mean, it was revolutionary what happened to the Soviet chess school. Absolutely revolutionary, more than any other period of chess, really. I mean, that's when chess came into its own, and really most of its beauty, the beauty of chess, just exploded during those early Soviet years because they were trying so many new things. That's where they understood the possibilities. They expanded the possibilities of chess so dramatically, not to mention playing very well. Oh, you meant the system with H6. Okay, the one that I showed. Okay. Yes, that was analyzed by Rubinstein. I didn't know that. That's interesting. Fascinating. Yeah, definitely a great player. I didn't know that at all. That's interesting because it's a fairly deep line, right? That starts on the 9th or 10th move, so that's impressive. And of course, the related line is the Zaitsev, right, which you can't force because people can play knight g5. But the related line is, well, we're going to have to go here, aren't we? I just realized how late it is to play the Zaitsev line with, what am I doing? What am I talking about, folks? No, it's not that related, is it? My fault. Okay, okay, forget that. I mean, it could be related with a certain move order, but I'm not gonna do that. Okay, what else do we have here? I guess my question is based on learning the variety of. Sorry, I'm kind of scrolling down the wrong way. I guess my question is based on my learning the variety of gaining the initiative by going over the golden era of players. Oh yeah, you can learn from any of those players, absolutely. I think if you really want to learn about the initiative, absolutely you can start with the real initiative type players. Even Botvinnik, who we think of as a positional player, was an incredible dynamic player. A lot of wonderful dynamic ideas, and then really obviously carries obviously the Botvinnik Smyslov matches I think are just wonderful. Tal is the ultimate. Spassky was the initiative. Yeah, if you want to learn the initiative, Spassky, Tal. Um, Early Karpov, he was amazing, and definitely Kasparov. So yeah, those guys are all wonderful to study. Not that other players aren't also, but certainly those are people worth studying. Since I studied Korchnoi growing up, I'm now seeing what he meant from one of his books about having the initiative. Korchnoi also, of course, loved to have the initiative. He's known as a counterattacker, so he liked to get the initiative from a fairly innocent kind of position of defense, and then suddenly launch into the attack. He also played the open Roy Lopez, didn't he? Okay, folks, we've gone on a long ways. This seems like a very natural. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, H6 prevents that. I know that. I was going to show you that, but then I thought we're getting a little too much off the subject. Very good comment. And the Zaitsev, if you play it a certain way, can become very solid like the Smyslov, but also has these super aggressive ideas in it that are not characteristic of the Smyslov. So they tend to have a different feel to them. And okay, and I could show that specifically, but I think it's a little too late in the show. Oh, we've gone way over time. So Petrosian was surprisingly interesting. I don't know if it was surprisingly interesting. I think he's just flat out interesting, and I think most players, most good, strong grandmasters would say he was one of the most interesting players of all time, for sure. Yeah, it's not all that surprising that someone who was so profound and had such wonderful, interesting, original ideas could do that. Now remember, I'm not going to be here next week for the first time in a while, but I hope to see you all in 2 weeks. And now you've got 2 weeks to prepare to stump me with some magnificent questions or show me good games and games that you've played, or show me other games that you just want to draw attention to. This is a wide open show, and anything you want to kind of talk about, it doesn't have to be something like a question that you don't know the answer to. That's not absolutely necessary at all. We're just talking about chess. So please send askimwatson@chessclub.com. That's the email route. That's the best route. ASKIMWATSON at chessclub.com. And have fun next Tuesday and come back recharged for our show 2 weeks from now. Thanks, everybody.